This is your Friday Daily Delivery. I am Michael Rand. Good show coming up today. Mark Craig joins for his weekly NFL picks segment. A lot of underdogs that Mark likes this week. It's kind of been the way of the NFL this season. A lot of surprises so far. So we'll get Mark's take on Week 7 and what to expect in the NFL. Also be joined by Megan Ryan from the Star Tribune. She covers the Twins, but she also does a lot of Gopher hockey coverage for us. Big series between the Gophers men's hockey team and Minnesota-Duluth this weekend coming up. Megan will help us get ready for that, kind of a snapshot of where the Gophers are this season, what that series means, and kind of their place in the pecking order in Minnesota, as Minnesota-Duluth has had quite a run here in the last decade. So we'll get to that here in just a little bit, as well as a look at maybe a couple trades. I don't know. Sometimes I feel like a trade machine. But first, what did I miss? Yeah, it's I was irrationally excited on Thursday night for Thursday Night Football. It wasn't a great matchup. Didn't end up being a great game. It turned out to be a close game. Not all close games are great games between the Broncos and the Browns. The reason I was interested, though, is Baker Mayfield was injured for the Browns. That meant Case Keenum was the quarterback for Cleveland. Broncos came in with Teddy Bridgewater as their starting quarterback. Teddy looked like he was a little bit banged up. He was on the injury report, but nonetheless, they both faced each other. Obviously, two former Vikings that played prominent roles. You know, Teddy was the number one first round draft pick in 2014, starter in 2015 when they went to the playoffs. Horrible injury in 2016. 17, they've got Sam Bradford, Teddy Bridgewater, and Case Keenum. Sam Bradford goes down. Teddy's not ready to play. Case takes over, has a great season. End of the year, they've got a decision to make. What are we going to do? Are we going to keep one of these guys, all of whom have had either injury or questions of consistency, or are we going to go out and get someone more proven on the free agent market? They end up going and getting, of course, Kirk Cousins. And Thursday's game is a reminder of that decision. And they got the best quarterback. I think we saw that reaffirmed in that Thursday night game. Just watching those two quarterbacks, how they struggled in certain situations in the 17-14 Browns win. And watching Kirk Cousins enough this year, last year, just throughout his Vikings career, the arm talent on Kirk Cousins is undeniable. Now the question is, of course, how much the Vikings have won and how much Kirk Cousins' salary has affected their ability to win. But I guess Thursday night's game, the larger point is it reinforced that if you're talking about what the best quarterback option was in free agency before the 2018 season, hands down, it was Kirk Cousins, and there's no debate about that.
I'm Chris Hine, Timberwolves beat writer at the Star Tribune and the first 5-time guest in daily delivery history. Thank you for listening to this podcast. This work is made possible by our Star Tribune subscribers. For unlimited access to the articles mentioned in this podcast, our coverage of Minnesota sports from pros to preps, and even all of Rand's future blog posts about how the Timberwolves should trade for players they will never get, go to startribune.com/subscribe.
It's NFL picks time on Daily Delivery. Mark Craig joins me as usual, does a great job covering the Vikings and the NFL for the Star Tribune. Picks the games every week, straight up and against the spread. We won't talk about last week. No, last week was okay, wasn't it?
Straight up, I did all right, 10-4 against the spread, which is why I would never bet in the NFL. 6-8, so almost had the upset special. I said that I swore that the Patriots would beat the Cowboys, and it almost happened. I think Belichick was like 109-3 when leading at halftime at home, and became 109-4 after the Cowboys came back and beat them in overtime. So almost got that one.
An overtime game. Vikings played an overtime game. We were talking before this segment started, before we get into the games themselves. Mark, it's been like just every game, it feels like, and it's not every game. It just feels that way. But maybe because we watch the Vikings so closely, maybe just because of the close games get magnified, but it's just a league that has trended this way for a while, but especially this year, it just feels like every game is coming down to a couple plays at the end, does it not?
Yeah, like in honor of Sid Hartman, it's no longer a crazy league; it's a crazier league. It seems like there's been 23 games now that have been decided in the final minute of regulation or overtime. The Vikings have 4 of those, 4 out of 6. I mean, Kirk Cousins has had, there's 4 games where he's had games with 5 or 6 comeback, where he's let them down to tie, go into overtime, do it again in overtime, and then they lose. It's just been all over the map. I'm sure Vikings fans are as tired as Mike Zimmer looked and said he was heading out of his presser on Sunday, that it gets exhausting watching, games where that should be in hand, and then they just get, upset, upended at the last 3 or 4 minutes. So, yeah, there's been 23 of them. That's a record. It's been fun to watch. A lot of really good primetime games to watch. You haven't seen not too many duds where, like the game on Monday night had 7 lead changes, and I read somewhere in NFL communications that that was the 3rd game this year that's had 7 lead changes in the game. So it's everything the NFL's ever wanted, basically on steroids. I mean, they've always been a close league that's back and forth, but this has been a special year for them and for fans watching games.
I mean, it used to be that if you got the ball back with 30 seconds left, it was pretty much you weren't going to score. And now it feels like 30 seconds is not an eternity, but it's like if you have even just a sliver of time, you're going to be able to potentially get into field goal range, at least if with 2 completions, even if you don't have any timeouts. Like there's offenses are so efficient with being able to move quickly, it seems like. Oh
yeah, I mean, and you look at that was never Kirk Cousins' deal, except for that one time that he trademarked his phrase. But an offensive line protecting him, this guy can do what these other great quarterbacks are doing. I won't say other great quarterbacks yet, but he can do what these really good quarterbacks can do. Give him 37 seconds one week and 42 seconds another week. He almost did it. He did it twice. Like I said, he led them to the game-winning attempt, and they missed that. Then they get it in overtime, and he goes down again and does it. So with protection, this guy's showing us with his accuracy and his decision-making, if he has time, can win you a lot of games, and it's worth what they're paying him. I don't know if I'd say that, but it's the case.
Vikings get some much-needed rest this week. It sounded like both Cousins and Zimmer were pretty spent after that Carolina game, but they do get to the bye at 3-3, give themselves a chance coming out of the bye, although doing what they're going to need to do without Patrick Peterson will be an interesting test to say the least against some of those better quarterbacks. So we won't have the Vikings to talk about on this picks segment, but I think the theme that we kind of started just now was just the unpredictability and the volatility of the NFL and just how these games are so close. Maybe that's illustrated pretty well this week by you've got 5 games, if we count them correctly, that are technically underdogs winning outright. Run me through those and kind of the rationale behind those.
Well, I got the Colts over the 49ers, Eagles over the Raiders, Falcons over the Dolphins. That's in Miami. It's Titans over the Chiefs. I like the Titans. I don't like that division, but the Titans and what they did, I picked them beating Buffalo on Monday. I just thought it was time. There's so many times where I pick games where it's just based solely on watching this league long enough, and you're just like, there's going to be correction moments. There's going to be moments where you just know that all the talk going into a game is going to be completely upended and coming out of the game. It's just the way the league is. It's such a momentum league. The teams that are up, they come down. The teams that are down until they lose so many that they're out of it, they tend to come up if they're a decent team. So, like the Falcons, just like the Falcons and Dolphins, this is the first time I think I've seen a team come back from London and have to play the next week. And they're not only they're playing the next week, they're playing against the Falcons, who are coming off a bye week after they went to London. So, that maybe it's an upset, maybe it's not. But according to the point spread, it is. Like I said, I like the Titans. I just feel like the Chiefs, this is going to be one of those years where the Chiefs go like 9-8, where they just, their defense is terrible. The offense turns the ball over more than you typically see them do. So I do like the Titans. The Eagles, watching them the last couple of games, just watching back the replays, I like their front four defensively. I think they can stop the run and put heat on Derek Carr. And then everybody's, the Raiders are kind of high because they won that first game after Gruden is gone, was forced to resign. They come back home. I feel like it'll be like this will be the letdown where the Raiders don't perform. Colts at 49ers. I don't know. I sort of like the Colts and how they've played some games. They're not great finishers. You're going out to I think they play in San Francisco. Garoppolo might be back. I don't know if that's good or bad. I mean, their quarterback situation, they got a lot of potential there, but there's still Trey Lance probably is not ready to be a starter. So yeah, I looked at a lot of these. It's not a great week for games. So the upsets seem to hit me.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to look at it. And it's, I don't know if is there a great team this year? I mean, I thought maybe it was going to be Buffalo, and maybe it still is. And, we shouldn't, if they make a foot the other day and go in and make a game-winning touchdown, maybe we're talking about them a little differently now. And we can't forget Arizona is undefeated, finding ways to win. But I don't see like this one team where you're like, wow, like even at the 6-game mark, I don't feel like I can identify the very best team in the league right now and say they're that much better than the second best team.
Yeah, no, I mean, there's a lot of teams, there's hot teams there. The Ravens, the Cowboys, the Packers, and the Cardinals have all won 5 or 6 straight games. But yeah, I don't. If you threw them all together, I mean, Baltimore is now kind of rounding into that team where like, look out for Baltimore in the AFC, but they needed a record field goal to beat the Lions. The Packers by the Saints. The Cowboys almost lost at New England. The Cardinals game, I might not have picked it had I known like Cleveland's entire roster would be out. The Browns had to play without both starting tackles. Their top running back and then the second best running back gets hurt. Baker Mayfield was injured and with his left shoulder, but I still like that the Cardinals went into Cleveland and took care of business. I was high on the Cardinals when we did the preseason NFL package. Sort of like this. The theme was the J.J. Watt when he had all these opportunities to go somewhere to win his ring. Why did he pick Arizona? And then when you look at their roster and you kind of assume that Kyler Murray is going to take another step, I really like them as a surprise team, even though they were in that division. People were saying, oh, they're going to finish third or fourth in the division. I didn't buy that. I didn't think they would be 6-0, but to me, they're the best team in the league right now. Just all that talent that they have, and the fact that they can go on the road and win some tough games, and winning that Vikings game is, to me, you look back on it, they only beat the Vikings by field goal or whatever. But to me, it's like when you win some of those games when you traditionally aren't that type of team, it says a lot about you. And when you throw in that talent, it says even more.
A couple more games I want to talk about. The best game of the week might be Bengals-Ravens. It could get lopsided. I think we're going to learn more about Cincinnati here in this game, right? They've played a lot of close games, escaping against the Vikings, not escaping against Green Bay. You think this one stays close?
I think it's a 6.5 point spread. It's so weird trying to pick games this year. Like even when a game is like 2.5, you're like, oh, are they going to cover? Because the games you're seeing 1 point games, 2 point games, 3 point games. So it's hard to really, it's why I would never bet on this league. The people who really know what's going on is the people that set the point spreads, because it's really hard to figure that out. But I think it's a 6.5 spread. Whenever I made these picks, I picked the Ravens to win by 6. It's like one of those. I feel like the Bengals have announced that they're here, but the Ravens announced last week with that dominant performance that they aren't going anywhere. Last year Pittsburgh got off to a hot start, 11-0. The Browns beat Pittsburgh in overtime. But Cincinnati's here, even though that's a tough division. But I think the Ravens, that organization, they have not looked dominant by any stretch because the defense on some of these primetime games have looked very un-Baltimore-like. But I really like where the Ravens are right now, coming off that game that they just had, and what they did to the Chargers out there was impressive.
And you don't like the Lions to beat the Rams, huh? In the Goff versus Stafford Bowl. What's the line on that's like 17 or something like that?
I think that's 15.
15. Okay, the bigger one maybe is the Titans and the Texans Cardinals is 17.5. Lions Rams is 15.
There's three teams are favored by 13.5 points or more, including the Bucks over the Bears, which I thought I see the Bucks winning that game, but I would not give 13.5 points. I think the Bears defense is too good to give that many points. I don't think they'll win, but and then you got the Packers. Vikings have a bye week, but so do the Packers. They got the Redskins or the
Washington football team.
The Washington football. I wish they get a nickname here. Washington football team. I think it's 9.5 points. The Packers are favored by. So the biggest surprise with Washington is just how horrendous that they were supposed to come in with this dominant front four and just be this great defense, and they're last in the league in points allowed. So the Packers will have they're going to win a 6th straight game there. So
yeah, absolutely. Well, no Vikings this week. Like I said, we'll be back at it next week. Vikings Dallas should be an interesting one on Halloween night. Could be one of those correction type games that you like to talk about, but we'll see about that. Good stuff, Mark. We'll see you again next week. All right.
All right. See you. Thanks.
When you hear that sound, it's because I feel like a trade machine. And Mark Craig and I talked about the Vikings cornerback depth problems and NFL trade deadline coming up here in a little over a week. Vikings only have, they'll only play one game before the deadline on Halloween because they have a bye this week. But we're going to find out in that game how their cornerback depth is tested with Patrick Peterson out for at least 3 games. Do Bashaud Breeland and Cameron Dantzler hold up, or is there someone they might be able to acquire in a trade? I know Xavier Howard is an attractive name. It's an expensive one. Doesn't necessarily fit into the cap as we see it structured right now. That would kind of be a bigger type of move, but is there a move they can make on the edges before the trade deadline to bolster their cornerback depth? Because the Peterson injury is probably going to expose this top-heavy roster and how little they have by way of corner depth. We're talking about guys like Chris Boyd probably getting some run in nickel packages, dime packages, things like that. If Breeland and Dantzler, A, if they can't hold up, or B, if teams spread them out because they see that Peterson is out. So I'll be interested to see how that plays out. The other half of the trade machine is Ben Simmons. The saga continues. I know we have talked about this ad nauseum, but man, it's getting worse and worse. Apparently, he and Philadelphia's ownership and management are going to meet on Friday again. It sounds like Thursday. He went in for some treatment on his back, got cleared to work out, but didn't do anything. It's super ugly, and it's funny. Wolves fans who maybe were in the yes, let's trade for Ben Simmons camp suddenly have been swayed by one good regular season performance against a lousy Rockets team and want to see what this team can do. And I get it. I'm not necessarily faulting you for that opinion, but I still feel like if Ben Simmons is available and you can get him for a reasonable price, you still have to do it at the risk of disrupting any sort of continuity because he would be the best player in any trade you would pull off. So I still feel like that's going to be percolating until it's not, and it's getting ugly in Philadelphia and getting even uglier right now. Megan Ryan joins Daily Delivery right now. Megan covers the Twins for the Star Tribune, but moonlights as a college hockey writer in the off season and does a great job of it. Is writing about Gophers versus Minnesota-Duluth men's hockey this weekend. There's an advance of that series on StarTribune.com and in your Friday newspaper. An interesting one, wouldn't you say, Megan?
Yeah, I think all these games are interesting these days because they're playing all the in-state rivals, So there's a lot of intrigue all around for Minnesota hockey fans, which I guess we all are because we're in the state of hockey.
Yeah, I mean, last weekend you had Gophers, St. Cloud State, which ended with controversy. St. Cloud State fans not happy about the non-call before the goal in overtime, which I can see why they were maybe upset. That was pretty bad. That series ended up being a split. So you've got Michigan at the top of this at the top of the rankings now. Then you go, is it St. Cloud or Minnesota?
Mm-hmm.
Minnesota State, St.
Minnesota
Cloud.
State is 2, yeah. Then
Minnesota State, St. Cloud, and then the Gophers, and then Minnesota-Duluth. So you got 2 through 5. Yep. Are in-state teams, and so you got this 4 versus 5 matchup. Rankings don't matter a ton in October, but they do give you an early kind of relative measure of where these teams stand, and it seems like both of these teams are pretty good right now and should give each other a good early test. One thing I thought was interesting from your story that I might jump into was just the age and then, relatively probably speaking to that size difference probably between these teams, because you wrote about how the Gophers just got done playing St. Cloud, which has a lot of older players, and the pandemic has kind of changed the dynamic a little bit. Maybe it was always a little bit more like this, where the non-metro Minnesota hockey teams had maybe some of the older players who played a year or two of juniors. But my goodness, Minnesota-Duluth, they've got a lot of fifth-year players, seniors, things like that to give them a test, right?
Oh yeah, they definitely do. And I mean, like, it's interesting because, that's like, it's kind of like a perpetual story, right? With the Gophers every year, they're always like the young team with the, highly drafted prospects that are coming right out of Edina High School, usually. So like, that is always the case. Like the Gophers always seem to be like the young, speedy, skilled team, but then it's like the other schools in the state, probably because they're not competing for those highly touted prospects, right? Because they're all going to the Gophers. So like they did a different strategy, which means like they're getting like guys that have gone through juniors already, overseas guys that are coming over and playing college hockey. So they always tend to be, bigger and older and more experienced. But the pandemic, because everybody's got this extra year of eligibility floating out there now, like there's a lot of 5th-year seniors that are coming back, and like St. Cloud had that. Duluth is going to have that this upcoming weekend. The Gophers only have one returning 5th year, and it's the goaltender, Jack LaFontaine. So it is it's a little bit of an exacerbated dynamic from even what it usually is. But I think what's interesting is like, even though there is that difference, like it was cool to see in the St. Cloud games last weekend, like how evenly matched or what tight games they were. Even though there was that big disparity, like I feel like both teams are really like, it was just, I don't know, that was good hockey, to be honest. Like I know it ended with the jersey pull that was very egregious, which is too bad, but I don't know. Sometimes that's just like the way the cookie crumbles, but I am expecting a similar kind of like tightly contested match with the Bulldogs this weekend for sure.
Yeah. And you wrote too, I mean, it's interesting because if we're thinking about what recruiting strategy has been winning out lately, I mean, the Gophers have certainly had successful teams, but they haven't won a championship since 2003. Minnesota-Duluth has won 3 in the last decade or so, and they went back-to-back a few years ago. They were back in the Frozen Four, last year during the pandemic season. There's still this kind of, reflex or instinct to call the Gophers the top program in the state, but accomplishment-wise, Minnesota-Duluth has leapfrogged them in the last decade.
Yeah, I mean, if you're looking at the overall history from like the beginning of hockey in the state, like 1890 or whatever, like yeah, the Gophers are still the best.
If we're counting the 3 Herb Brooks championships from the 70s,
yes. Exactly. Like they got the most titles and they have the most like NHL players and all that jazz. But if we're looking at recent history, like Duluth has been consistently the best program in Minnesota. And it is interesting that for some reason, like people still feel like it's the Gophers with the target on their back instead of the other way around. Even a couple of players mentioned to me mentioned that to me this weekend, that, it's always like, oh yeah, like we're the one that people are gunning for. And it's probably just like that age old thing of, if those Duluth boys are up there in Iron Range, like just gritting it out, and probably like were overlooked by the Gophers, like didn't get recruited. And then you've got all these like, guys who are from these flashy programs like Edina, just like skating their way in there as 18-year-olds. So, it's a good storyline. It's just very funny that it persists like to this day, because Duluth is really good. Like they should be the one that we're all looking at. And especially even if you just look at this last Frozen Four, all 5 Minnesota teams made it to the NCAA tournament, which is like a big accomplishment in and of itself. But then like, who didn't make it? Bemidji, which, okay, sorry, Bemidji. And then like the Gophers, like they were the ones who like they lost to Mankato to not get in, right? So it is interesting that keeps coming up. But I do feel like, Duluth is, they're like, they're every year, even if you kind of look at them, you're like, maybe, who knows? Like every year they somehow find a way to be really good. And that's been a consistency that the Gophers have not had recently.
Yeah, that's very true. Bob Motzko has this program going in the right direction. I think we would agree. But, one thing that he talked about in your story that I thought was a good point to bring up as we kind of finish up here is, just their schedule. I love their schedule. And, they were doing some of this already. But, when the old WCHA broke up, which is a war crime 8 years ago,
people are not over it.
I'm still not over it. I'll admit it. I'm from Grand Forks originally, so I love the original, WCHA, the old rivalries, all the great, games in the old Ralph, not the new Ralph. But that aside, they're preserving at least some of that, playing St. Cloud, playing Minnesota-Duluth, and I believe they have series next month against North Dakota, and then Wisconsin's obviously still a Big Ten opponent, so that's that they're on the schedule no matter what. But how important do you think that is to the fan base, even to the players in the program, to still be able to play some of those traditional rivals?
I think it's important. Like, I guess like the older we get, I remember in my college days, that was still the old WCHA.
Yes.
So like, I remember the good old days, but it is interesting. I feel so old. Like I remember when Sammy Walker and Blake McLaughlin were freshmen, and now they're seniors, and it makes me feel very old. But it is interesting because like now that you see people age up, like some of these kids that are coming in, like don't really remember the old WCHA, or they maybe like heard about it from their dad or whatever, but like it's not like they grew up really watching it, right? So that's what's really interesting, is like it is going to be something that like the old guard remembers really fondly, and it was like great times. But I do wonder, like the kids that are playing in it now, it's like they're probably like, oh yeah, like it's great to play the other Minnesota teams, but like I'm not sure that they like have the context of like how those teams are playing each other like constantly back in the day, and like how fierce like the North Dakota Gophers rivalry was, for example. And now it's kind of like they see each other like once every other year maybe. Yeah, it is interesting. Like, Bob Motzko did say like that's, people miss that. The fans miss that. He like old fans, he knows. And so like he said, like, it's always going to be something where we're going to be trying to, we can't play every Minnesota team or North Dakota every year, but we can have a rotation and try to get them in every other year or so. But the other thing too, that I think was good of him is like, he's like, but that's not always going to be like our whole non-conference schedule. Like he thinks it's really important too, which they haven't done in a while, but to like get out East to do like a trip and do a non-conference, like playing BU or something like that out there. Cause there's not really a lot of opportunity to play those teams really until you're in the postseason. And obviously there's been a lot of national championships that have come out that way from,
sure.
Remember Union? Do we remember that 2014?
Oh, just a little bit, just a little bit.
A little bit. I was there. I recall it fondly. But yeah, like, he wants to like once, maybe not that they're going to go out East every year, but like once in a guy's career, I think he said like every 4 years, have one of those big trips out there so they can like experience that. But for the most part, yeah, like the in-state rivalries, they will live on only through the non-conference, or like if the North Star Cup ever comes back. Remember that?
I do remember the North Star Cup. That was great. I know, it was great. And then over too soon. So, there's opportunity, but yeah, for now, it's like, you really got to make the onus to schedule it. Otherwise they're not going to happen. I believe the North Dakota series is over Thanksgiving weekend in North Dakota, but this one here,
Home and away Friday at Mariucci, 3M at Mariucci Friday night, then at Minnesota-Duluth on Saturday, both of those 7 o'clock games. How much of that are we covering?
We're covering the Friday night game.
The Friday night game?
I will be there.
Okay.
At Mariucci, yeah.
Well, sounds good. Look for that coverage. Star Tribune, StarTribune.com. Follow Meg Ryan at the other Meg Ryan, not to be confused with the actress, even though she has
real Meg Ryan on Twitter.
Even though she has the flair
Meg
for
Ryan.
drama in her own right. Meg, thanks for joining me, and we'll do this again soon. Okay.
Thanks, Aaron.
Good stuff from Megan Ryan. Love talking college hockey. And reminder that Gophers Minnesota-Duluth game is on Bally Sports North on Friday night. One of the only things you can watch locally because not much else is going on Friday. Saturday, on the other hand, will be extremely busy. Not only do you have Gophers Minnesota-Duluth rematch, that one's up in Duluth, but Gophers Maryland football at 2:30. Gopher Wild Anaheim at 5. Timberwolves against the Pelicans at 7. And Minnesota United against LAFC at 7. All of those are home matches. Whoever set these schedules should have consulted with one another, but hey, we'll take it. Should be a fun Saturday. Have a great weekend. Enjoy all the sports, and we'll be back at it again on Monday.